The most expensive mistake a man can make is judging a woman's worth by the size of her bank account. The crystal chandeliers of the Whitmore Grand Hotel scattered rivers of golden light across the ballroom as Naomi Carter stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Beyond the glass, the city shimmered beneath the spring night sky, millions of lights stretching toward the horizon like stars that had fallen to earth. At 32, Naomi carried herself with a quiet elegance that drew attention without demanding it. Her deep brown skin glowed beneath the warm lighting, and her emerald satin gown flowed gracefully as she adjusted a silver bracelet on her wrist. Around her, New York's elite laughed over champagne and discussed mergers worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet Naomi's attention remained fixed on the man across the room. Ethan Whitmore stood at the center of every conversation, exactly where he liked to be. At 38, the white-haired billionaire CEO commanded attention as naturally as breathing. His tailored tuxedo fit perfectly, his confident smile never faltered, and every person who approached him seemed eager to earn his approval. 7 years earlier, Naomi had fallen in love with that smile. Tonight, for the first time, she wondered if she had ever truly known the man behind it. "There she is," Ethan said loudly as he finally approached, a glass of bourbon in his hand. Several guests turned toward them immediately. "My wife decided to join us." The comment sounded harmless. The laughter that followed did not. Naomi smiled politely. "I was speaking with Mrs. Kensington." Ethan nodded absently before taking a sip of his drink. "Well, somebody has to keep you entertained. God knows finance discussions aren't really your thing." More laughter. Naomi felt the familiar sting but kept her expression calm. Years of marriage had taught her that dignity was often found in silence. Across the ballroom, Ethan's business partners exchanged knowing glances. Some of them had always viewed Naomi as the beautiful wife who contributed little to her husband's empire. Others simply assumed she was fortunate to have married a billionaire. None of them knew the truth. Ethan draped an arm casually around her shoulder and turned toward his guests. "You know, when we met, Naomi barely had 2 nickels to rub together." The crowd chuckled. "Good thing she found me before Manhattan rent found her." The joke landed exactly as he intended. Naomi heard the laughter grow louder. Crystal glasses clinked. Someone nearly spit out their champagne. Ethan grinned, pleased with himself. Then he delivered the sentence that would change everything. "Without me," he said, raising his glass, "she'd have absolutely nothing." For a moment, the ballroom seemed strangely quiet. Naomi looked at her husband. Really looked at him. Not the successful CEO. Not the charming public figure. Just the man standing proudly in front of hundreds of people, while reducing his wife to a punchline. The city lights reflected in the glass behind her. Somewhere below, traffic moved endlessly through Manhattan. Life continued. The world did not stop. Yet something inside Naomi shifted. Not anger. Not heartbreak. Something colder. Something clearer. She simply smiled. A small, graceful smile that none of the guests understood. Ethan certainly didn't. Because while everyone in that ballroom believed Naomi Carter was the broke wife of a billionaire, not a single person knew that within 12 months, her name would dominate financial headlines across America. And the man laughing the loudest tonight would become the one who regretted it most. The laughter lingered long after Ethan's words faded into the music. It floated through the ballroom like invisible smoke, settling into corners, weaving between crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. Naomi remained composed, her hands resting lightly around the stem of her sparkling water glass. She had spent years mastering that expression. Calm, gracious, unshaken. It was the same expression she wore whenever someone assumed she could not understand a business conversation. The same expression she wore whenever another executive's wife offered her career advice without realizing Naomi had never once asked for it. Around her, the evening continued as if nothing unusual had happened. A string quartet played near the grand staircase. Waiters moved silently through the crowd carrying silver trays. Beyond the towering windows, Manhattan glowed beneath a blanket of city lights. Yet Naomi could feel the familiar eyes, the curious glances, the subtle judgments. They had followed her for years. Across the room, Vanessa Whitmore, Ethan's older sister, was speaking with several women from the charity board. Naomi noticed the way Vanessa looked toward her and shook her head slightly. She had seen that look before. It was the look reserved for disappointments. 7 years ago, when Ethan first introduced Naomi to his family, Vanessa had smiled politely before asking where Naomi had gone to college. When Naomi answered, the room had fallen strangely quiet. Not because the university lacked prestige, because nobody recognized the name. They had expected Ivy League. They had expected old money. They had expected someone who matched the Whitmore image. Instead, they found a woman who preferred privacy over status. A woman who never felt the need to advertise her accomplishments. Over time, assumptions filled every silence Naomi left behind. The Whitmores assumed Ethan paid for everything. His friends assumed Naomi enjoyed a comfortable life financed by her husband's success. Even the tabloids occasionally described her as a former struggling artist, despite the fact that she had never painted a single canvas in her life. The truth was almost amusing. Naomi had never corrected anyone. She never felt the need. Wealth, her grandfather used to say, was safest when nobody knew it existed. Ethan joined a group of investors near the ballroom's center. His confident voice carried across the room. People listened when he spoke. They admired him. Some even envied him. Naomi once admired him too. Back when his ambition felt inspiring instead of exhausting. Back when success had not become the only language he understood. A young woman approached Naomi holding a champagne flute. Her designer gown sparkled beneath the lights. "You are very lucky," she said warmly. Naomi smiled. "Lucky? To be married to someone like Ethan. Most women would dream of a life like yours." Naomi glanced toward her husband. He was laughing again. Someone had complimented his latest acquisition. Another congratulated him on a recent interview. The room revolved around him effortlessly. "Yes," Naomi said softly. "That is what most people think." The woman nodded and walked away without realizing the weight hidden inside those words. Naomi turned back toward the city skyline. Far below, yellow taxis crawled through the streets like streams of light. Somewhere beyond those buildings stood a world none of these people knew existed. A world connected to her family name. A world she had deliberately kept hidden. Tonight she realized something painful. Nobody had misjudged her more completely than the man she married. And the most heartbreaking part was that he had never cared enough to discover who she really was. The party ended just after midnight, but the silence that followed felt louder than the music ever had. Rain tapped softly against the windows of the penthouse as Naomi stood alone in the kitchen, carefully placing untouched dessert plates into the dishwasher. The city skyline stretched beyond the glass, glowing silver beneath low clouds. 7 years earlier, she and Ethan had celebrated their first anniversary in a tiny apartment barely large enough for a dining table. Back then they had eaten takeout on the floor and laughed about the future. Tonight they occupied one of the most expensive penthouses in Manhattan, yet somehow felt farther apart than strangers. The sound of Ethan's footsteps echoed through the hallway. He loosened his tie as he entered the kitchen, his expression carrying the exhaustion of someone who believed the world rested on his shoulders. Naomi dried her hands with a linen towel and looked at him quietly. For a moment neither spoke. The distance between them seemed larger than the room itself. Ethan poured himself a glass of water and stared toward the city. "The board meeting went well," he said. "The acquisition should close next quarter." Naomi nodded politely. "Congratulations. That deal alone will increase company value by nearly $300 million. Another nod. Another silence. Ethan finally turned toward her. "Do you ever think about contributing more?" Naomi blinked once. "Contributing to the life we built." His tone remained calm, which somehow made the words feel colder. "Everyone around us is moving forward, building something, expanding, creating value." Naomi studied his face. "And you think I do not?" Ethan sighed impatiently. "You know what I mean." She did. The conversation was not new. It had simply become more frequent over the past year. Every success seemed to widen the gap between them. Every promotion made Ethan more ambitious and less patient, more concerned with appearances, more obsessed with measurements of worth. Net worth, market value, public image. Naomi walked toward the living room where a framed wedding photograph sat on a marble shelf. Their younger selves smiled back from another lifetime. She remembered that day perfectly. Ethan had looked at her as if she were the only person in the world. Somewhere along the journey, that look had disappeared. "What exactly are you trying to say?" she asked softly. Ethan set his glass down. "I am saying I am tired, Naomi." "Tired of what?" He hesitated. For the first time all evening, uncertainty crossed his face. Then it vanished. "Tired of carrying everything alone." The words settled heavily into the room. Naomi stared at him. 7 years. 7 years of loyalty. 7 years of standing beside him through failures, risks, losses, and victories. 7 years of believing partnership meant more than public recognition. Yet somehow he still saw himself as carrying the weight alone. "You really believe that?" she asked. Ethan looked away first. "I think we both know it is true." Outside, a flash of distant lightning illuminated the skyline. The room brightened for a second before returning to shadow. Naomi felt something inside her become very still. Not broken. Not wounded. Simply still. She realized this conversation had been approaching for months. Perhaps years. Like a train she could hear long before it arrived. Ethan moved toward his office without another word. The door closed behind him. Naomi remained beside the wedding photograph. Her reflection appeared faintly in the glass, covering the frame. She touched the corner gently. Then she smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone finally understanding a truth she had avoided for far too long. The man she married had spent years measuring her value. And soon he was going to make the most expensive calculation of his life. 3 days later, Manhattan woke beneath a sky the color of polished steel. Inside Whitmore Capital's headquarters, Ethan sat at the head of a 40-foot conference table, reviewing acquisition reports while executives waited for his approval. Numbers filled the screens around him. Projections. Forecasts. Valuations. The language he trusted more than anything else. Yet despite the successful meeting, something lingered in the back of his mind. Naomi had barely spoken since the anniversary gala. The silence did not concern him at first. She had always been composed. Always patient. Always willing to let disagreements fade with time. That morning, however, his phone buzzed with a message from his attorney. The subject line was simple, personal and urgent. Ethan opened the email without much thought. Within seconds, his expression changed. The attached document contained a formal request. Divorce proceedings. Initiated by Naomi Carter. For several moments he simply stared at the screen. Around him, executives continued discussing quarterly earnings, unaware that their chief executive officer had stopped listening. Ethan leaned back in his chair. The surprise quickly transformed into irritation. He had expected tension. He had expected difficult conversations. He had not expected action, especially not from Naomi. By the time he returned to the penthouse that evening, the city was glowing beneath another sea of lights. The apartment felt unusually quiet. No music drifted from the kitchen. No candles flickered near the windows. No sign of Naomi's presence remained except for a single envelope resting on the marble countertop. Ethan picked it up. His name was written neatly across the front. Inside was a brief handwritten note. "Ethan, I spent years believing love meant being seen for who you are. Somewhere along the way we stopped seeing each other. I wish you success, peace, and happiness. Take care of yourself. Naomi." That was all. No accusations. No anger. No dramatic farewell. Just dignity wrapped inside a few carefully chosen sentences. Ethan walked through the penthouse searching for evidence that she might still be there. The guest room was empty. The closets were half vacant. Several personal items were gone. Yet much remained untouched. Expensive jewelry sat inside drawers. Designer handbags remained carefully arranged on shelves. Nothing suggested a woman scrambling to secure financial survival. In the master bedroom, Ethan noticed something resting atop the dresser. A small velvet box. He opened it slowly. Inside lay Naomi's wedding ring. The diamond caught the light from the city outside, sending tiny reflections across the room. Ethan stared at it for a long time. He expected to feel victorious, free. Instead, an unfamiliar emptiness settled over him. His phone rang. Vanessa's name appeared on the screen. "Well?" she asked immediately after he answered. "I heard." Ethan loosened his tie. It is done. Honestly, it is probably for the best. You two were never a perfect match. Ethan looked toward the ring again. Maybe. You need someone who understands your world. Vanessa paused. Someone more suitable. Suitable. The word echoed strangely in his mind after the call ended. Hours later, Ethan stood alone beside the penthouse windows holding a glass of bourbon. Below him, Manhattan pulsed with endless motion. People chasing dreams. Building futures. Losing opportunities without realizing it. Somewhere in the city, Naomi was beginning a new chapter. He imagined a modest apartment. A difficult adjustment. A woman trying to rebuild after losing access to the life he had provided. The thought almost made him feel sorry for her. Almost. What Ethan did not know was that less than 24 hours earlier, a private jet had landed at Teterboro Airport carrying one of the most powerful estate attorneys in America. And waiting inside a secure conference room downtown was a sealed family document that would soon change Naomi's life forever. The conference room overlooking Central Park was silent except for the gentle ticking of a grandfather clock that had stood in the Carter family for nearly 80 years. Naomi sat at the far end of a mahogany table polished to a mirror shine while three attorneys reviewed a collection of documents spread before them. Morning sunlight streamed through towering windows, painting the room in shades of gold and ivory. For the first time in weeks, she felt completely at peace. Across from her, Richard Bennett, one of the most respected estate attorneys in the country, carefully removed a sealed envelope from a leather case. His silver hair reflected the morning light as he slid the document toward her. Your grandfather instructed that this be opened only when specific conditions were met, he said. Naomi recognized the familiar handwriting immediately. Her chest tightened. Even after 3 years, she still missed him. Harold Carter had built Carter Global Holdings from a small investment firm into a financial empire spanning 4 continents. Yet despite his wealth, he had always valued character above status. He believed you needed to choose your own path, Richard continued. He wanted you loved for who you were, not for what you inherited. Naomi smiled sadly. He always said money reveals people. It does not change them. Richard nodded. And now the final provisions of his estate have been activated. One by one, the documents were placed before her. Ownership transfers, trust agreements, voting rights, asset disclosures. Numbers appeared that would leave most people speechless. Real estate holdings, technology investments, international partnerships, charitable foundations. The total valuation exceeded $2 billion. Yet Naomi's expression barely changed. The money itself was not the surprise. She had known her family's resources were substantial. What moved her was the responsibility attached to them. Her grandfather was entrusting her with a legacy. Not a fortune. A legacy. Richard handed her one final letter. Naomi unfolded the page carefully. The ink had faded slightly with time. If you are reading this, my darling granddaughter, it means life has taught you an important lesson. Never measure yourself through the eyes of people who cannot see your value. Build a life so full of purpose that nobody else's opinion can define you. Naomi lowered the letter and stared out at the city. Tears never came. Instead, she felt strength. Quiet, steady, unshakable strength. Over the following months, she disappeared from the social circles that once revolved around Ethan Whitmore. She declined interviews, ignored invitations, refused public attention. While Manhattan speculated about the billionaire divorce, Naomi immersed herself in board meetings, leadership training, and strategic planning sessions. She traveled between New York, Chicago, London, and Singapore. She studied every division of Carter Global Holdings. She listened more than she spoke, learned more than she revealed. Slowly, executives twice her age began seeking her approval. By the end of the year, employees across multiple continents knew her reputation. Fair, intelligent, disciplined, visionary. The woman many once assumed was simply a billionaire's wife was becoming something far greater. And while Ethan continued building his company, believing the past had been left behind, Naomi was quietly preparing for a future neither of them could yet imagine. 1 year passed faster than anyone expected. Seasons changed above Manhattan's skyline. Companies rose and fell. Headlines came and went. Yet one name quietly began appearing in places that captured the attention of the financial world. Carter Global Holdings. First, Ethan barely noticed it. The company had always existed in the background of major economic discussions, powerful enough to influence markets but private enough to avoid unnecessary publicity. Then came the articles, strategic acquisitions, international expansions, philanthropic initiatives worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Every report carried the same message. New leadership was transforming the organization. On a crisp October morning, Ethan stepped out of a board meeting and found a cream-colored envelope waiting on his desk. The paper felt expensive. The embossed gold lettering carried the seal of the National Economic Leadership Foundation. He opened it casually, expecting another fundraising gala. Instead, his attention caught on a single line. You are cordially invited to attend the National Visionaries Gala, honoring this year's Business Leader of the Year. Ethan skimmed the details. The event would take place at the Grand Regent Ballroom, one of the most exclusive venues in New York City. Politicians, investors, executives, and media leaders from around the country would attend. The recipient's identity remained confidential until the evening of the ceremony. Interesting, he thought. Few honors carried enough prestige to surprise him anymore. Later that week, conversations about the gala seemed to follow him everywhere. Television commentators speculated about the winner. Financial journalists debated candidates. Names of famous founders and influential chief executives filled business podcasts and magazine covers. Nobody seemed certain. Meanwhile, nearly 1,000 miles away in Chicago, Naomi stood inside the executive headquarters of Carter Global Holdings, reviewing final preparations for an upcoming board presentation. The office occupied the top floor of a glass tower overlooking Lake Michigan. Sunlight reflected across the water, casting shimmering patterns against the windows. An assistant entered carrying a garment bag. "The gown has arrived," she said with a smile. Naomi glanced up from a stack of reports. "Thank you." After the assistant left, she returned her attention to the presentation. The gown remained untouched. That simple detail said everything about how much she had changed. 1 year earlier, public appearances might have felt important. Now results mattered more. Impact mattered more. Purpose mattered more. Yet even she understood the significance of the upcoming evening. Not because of recognition, because it marked the completion of a journey. The proving ground her grandfather once described. The moment when preparation finally met opportunity. Back in New York, Ethan arrived at the gala on a cool November evening. The city sparkled beneath a cloudless sky. Television cameras lined the entrance. Luxury cars stretched around the block. Crystal lights illuminated the massive ballroom like a palace built from gold and glass. As Ethan stepped inside, he noticed something unusual. Conversations kept returning to the same topic. The mystery recipient. Whoever they were. Anticipation surrounded them. Journalists whispered. Investors speculated. Executives exchanged theories. Ethan smiled confidently. He knew most of the names being discussed. Yet as he took his seat beneath the glow of 1,000 chandeliers, a strange feeling settled over him. He could not explain it. Somewhere beyond the ballroom doors, a black luxury sedan had just arrived. And inside sat a woman the entire room believed they had never truly met. The ballroom lights dimmed gradually until thousands of conversations softened into a low murmur. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead like constellations suspended in gold. Every seat was occupied. Every camera pointed toward the stage. The anticipation had become almost tangible. Ethan adjusted the cuff of his tuxedo and glanced around the room. Politicians sat beside technology founders. Investment giants shared tables with philanthropists and media executives. This was not simply another gala. It was a gathering of people who shaped industries and influenced economies. A master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage, welcoming guests before recounting the accomplishments of the evening's honoree. The description was impressive. Strategic growth across international markets. Record-breaking charitable initiatives. Thousands of jobs created. A leadership style praised for both discipline and compassion. Ethan listened carefully. The achievements sounded familiar, yet he could not connect them to a specific individual. Around the ballroom, guests exchanged curious looks. The mystery only deepened. Then the giant screens positioned around the room illuminated with a montage of photographs. City skylines, corporate headquarters, community centers, scholarship recipients, global conferences. The audience watched attentively as a narrator described a leader who had quietly transformed an empire while avoiding publicity. Ethan frowned slightly. Something about the story felt different from the usual celebration of power and wealth. This felt personal, purpose-driven, human. The master of ceremonies smiled and opened a gold envelope. The room became perfectly silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "the national business leader of the year is..." He paused, every eye fixed on the stage. Naomi Carter, chairwoman and chief executive officer of Carter Global Holdings. For one heartbeat, the entire ballroom seemed frozen in place. Ethan blinked, then blinked again. Surely he had misheard. The giant screens behind the stage shifted instantly. A portrait appeared. Naomi, elegant, confident, radiant. The same woman who had once stood quietly beside him at countless events. The same woman everyone assumed needed his success to define her life. Gasps rippled through the audience. Then came applause. Loud, sustained, respectful. Naomi emerged from the side entrance wearing a sleek black gown that seemed to capture every beam of light in the room. Her posture was calm. Her smile was composed. She walked toward the stage with the effortless confidence of someone who belonged there. Ethan could not move. Around him, guests rose to their feet. The applause grew louder. On the screens, financial statistics appeared beside her name. Revenue growth, international expansion, charitable impact. Then came the figure that sent another wave of astonishment through the ballroom. Estimated personal net worth, over $2 billion. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. $2 billion. The number echoed through his mind. Not because of the money itself, because of what it revealed. Every assumption he had ever made shattered in a single moment. Naomi had never depended on him. She had never needed his wealth. She had never been the woman he imagined. While he spent years believing he was carrying their marriage, she had quietly carried a legacy far larger than anything he understood. The audience continued applauding as Naomi reached the podium. Her eyes moved across the room, acknowledging supporters and colleagues. Then, for the briefest moment, her gaze passed over Ethan. No anger, no bitterness, no triumph, just quiet recognition. The look lasted less than a second, yet it felt longer than the entire year since their divorce. Standing beneath the glow of 1,000 chandeliers, Ethan finally saw the woman he had failed to see for 7 years. And the realization hurt far more than any public embarrassment ever could. The applause continued long after Naomi finished her acceptance speech. Reporters rushed to file stories. Investors exchanged astonished reactions. Social media exploded with photographs from the evening. Yet none of that occupied Ethan's thoughts as he sat alone in his penthouse hours later, staring at a collection of articles spread across his dining table. Every headline carried her name. Every profile revealed pieces of a life he had never bothered to understand. Carter Global Holdings, family legacy, international influence, philanthropic foundations, leadership awards. The information felt impossible, not because it was hidden, because he had never looked. Ethan picked up an old photograph from a drawer nearby. It showed him and Naomi during their second year of marriage, standing on a rooftop beneath summer sunlight. She was smiling, not for a camera, for him. The realization hit harder than anything he had experienced at the gala. Naomi had never changed. She had always been extraordinary. He had simply reduced her to the role he expected her to play. Over the following weeks, the story dominated financial news. Analysts praised her leadership. Business magazines featured her on their covers. Several major acquisitions completed under her direction were celebrated as masterclasses in long-term strategy. Again and again, Ethan encountered the same description. Visionary, disciplined, respected, trusted. Every compliment felt like another reminder of his blindness. One afternoon, unable to ignore the weight of regret any longer, Ethan requested a meeting. He expected assistants to reject him. He expected delays. Instead, a brief response arrived 2 days later. 30 minutes. Tuesday, 4 o'clock. Carter Global Holdings New York office. The building stood only a few blocks from places he had visited for years, yet stepping inside felt like entering another world. Elegant without being excessive, powerful without needing to announce itself. Ethan was escorted to a private conference room overlooking the Hudson River. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the afternoon sunlight. Fresh flowers rested on a side table. Everything reflected quiet confidence. Then the door opened. Naomi entered carrying a tablet and a folder of documents. Her black tailored suit was simple, sophisticated, professional. She looked exactly like someone who belonged at the top of a global organization. Ethan rose immediately. For a moment neither spoke. "Thank you for seeing me," he finally said. Naomi offered a polite smile and took her seat. "How have you been, Ethan?" The question was sincere. That made it harder. "Honestly," he exhaled slowly. "Not very well." Naomi listened without interrupting, the same way she always had. Ethan looked toward the river before meeting her eyes again. "I owe you an apology." Silence settled gently between them. "I spent years believing I understood who you were," he continued. "The truth is I never took the time to learn. I judged your value through the wrong lens. I thought success belonged to whoever earned the most attention, whoever controlled the biggest room." His voice grew quieter. "I was wrong." Naomi remained calm. No satisfaction crossed her face. No resentment. Only understanding. Ethan swallowed hard. "The worst part is not discovering your success. The worst part is realizing how much I missed while standing right beside you." Outside the windows, the late afternoon sun reflected across the water. Naomi glanced toward the light before returning her gaze to him. For the first time since the divorce, Ethan felt the full weight of what he had lost. And for the first time, he understood that no amount of money could purchase a second chance that had not been earned. Naomi remained silent for several seconds after Ethan finished speaking. The sunlight had begun to soften beyond the conference room windows, casting golden reflections across the Hudson River. In another life, she might have rushed to comfort him. She might have searched for words to ease his regret. But that version of Naomi no longer existed. Growth had changed her. Not into someone colder, into someone clearer. She folded her hands gently on the table and offered a small smile. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. Ethan nodded, though disappointment lingered behind his eyes. He had come hoping for forgiveness, perhaps even hope. Instead, he found honesty. "I spent a long time angry at myself," he admitted. "Every article I read, every interview I watched, every success you achieved, it forced me to confront who I had become." Naomi studied him carefully. For the first time in years, she saw humility where pride once lived. "People make mistakes," she said softly. "What matters is whether they learn from them." Ethan looked down briefly before meeting her gaze again. "And did I learn too late?" The question hung between them. Outside, a ferry moved slowly across the river, leaving gentle ripples in its wake. Naomi followed the movement for a moment before answering. "You did learn." Ethan waited. "But some lessons arrive with consequences." The truth landed quietly. No anger. No accusation. Just truth. Ethan leaned back in his chair and exhaled. Deep down, he had known the answer before asking. Still, hearing it made the loss real. Naomi stood and walked toward the windows. The city stretched endlessly before her. Towers of glass and steel reaching toward the sky. Dreams being built inside every one of them. "Do you remember our first apartment?" she asked suddenly. Ethan smiled despite himself. "The one with the broken air conditioner? And the neighbors who argued every Friday night?" He laughed softly. "I remember." Naomi nodded. "Back then we were happy because we saw each other. Not because of money. Not because of success. Just because we believed in the same future." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "I stopped seeing that." "Yes," Naomi said gently. "You did." The room fell quiet once more. Eventually, Ethan rose to his feet. He understood there was nothing left to argue. Nothing left to negotiate. Love could survive hardship. It could survive distance. But it could not survive being taken for granted forever. "I am proud of you, Naomi," he said. And this time he truly meant it. Naomi smiled. Thank you. They walked toward the door together. Two people connected by memories but separated by the choices that followed them. Before leaving, Ethan paused. Can I ask one last question? Naomi nodded. When did you know it was over? She thought for a moment. Then her answer came with the calm certainty of someone who had already healed. The night you decided my value could be measured. Ethan lowered his eyes. He understood. Finally, completely understood. Minutes later, Naomi stepped outside the building. Evening had settled over Manhattan. The city glowed beneath thousands of lights. A black sedan waited at the curb. As she entered the car, her phone buzzed with a message from a scholarship foundation she funded. Hundreds of students would receive support next year because of a program she had personally created. Naomi smiled as the vehicle pulled away. Ahead of her stretched new opportunities, new challenges, and a future built entirely on her own terms. Behind her remained a chapter that had taught its final lesson. Sometimes the greatest victory is not proving someone wrong. It is becoming so completely yourself that their opinion no longer matters. And as the city lights reflected across the window beside her, Naomi Carter moved forward without bitterness, without regret, and without looking back.